to another episode of The Exit Interview with me, Dr. Asian Lyons, and my favorite co-host, Kevin.
There we go. How you doing, Asia? It's good to be
I
here.
can't complain. Kevin's out here living his best life. Kevin Adams, and today, our guest, Enola Garland, is here to join us and tell us her story, her exit interview. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. I am very excited to be here.
We realized just a minute ago before we came on air that Enola has already heard our podcast, and that's how we met. She messaged me on LinkedIn a while ago about some great projects, and then she said today, like, hey, I listened to your show, and it tells me when you all are coming up and pinging when the shows drop. And so you just told her, like, now it'll be you that will be hearing your story. So thank you so much for having us, or thank you so much for coming on our show. Lord have mercy. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. First questions first. Tell us, how did you decide to go into education?
So I usually tell people that I fell into it. When I was a kid, I was that kid that was teacher's pet. Like, I wanted to be a teacher. And then I remember in sixth grade, we did like a career day, and I found out how much teachers made. And I was like, no.
Won't bet.
But when it was in 2013, I was having a really hard time finding a job. I'd moved out to California, and my best friend's brother had worked at a before and after school program for children at an elementary school. And he was like, you know what, you have a lot of patience. I think you should try this. So I did, and I loved it. I usually was put with the younger kids, like kindergarten to second grade, and like those were the kids that I really clicked with. And then I got to pick up shifts in the preschool room that they had on site as well. And I just absolutely loved that age group. I thought it was just such a fantastic opportunity to get in and help them build those basic skills before they went into elementary school. Because I would work with some of those kindergartners, and there were things that they didn't know, like writing their name, that I felt like, oh, wow, I wish I could go back and help you with that. And so when I moved back to Colorado, I'd actually grown up here and moved back here in, what was it, 2014, I believe, 2015. I saw a job opening at a Head Start program in Colorado Springs. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And it was probably the best career move that I feel like I've made, as far as things that I've done in that early childhood space. Anybody who's familiar with Head Start, I think they would know that just the quality of the program is amazing. The amount of training that was given was stellar. It was stuff that I took to me to every program that I went to. And I just really appreciated their philosophy on that two-generation approach between, the program and the child and the family, and just that idea that you can't separate the family from the child. If you're going to help the child, you have to help the family as well. And I think that was just, it made so much sense to me. And another thing that I saw that I really appreciated from them was just a willingness to invest in their teachers. I don't know if it's this way across, all Head Start programs, but the one that I was in, they would pay for school, and however long you stayed at the program, you owed less. So if you stayed 1 year and then left, you would have to pay back 75% of, whatever they paid. If you stayed 2 years, 50%, and so on. And I just felt like that kind of investment, it means a lot. It means a lot as a teacher. I mean, honestly, as an employee of any program or company or organization, when your employer says, you know what, I believe in you, I want to invest money in your education so that you can do better. It made me feel less like, I'm not a name on a schedule. They care enough about me to put this money into my education, knowing that, someday I might move on and I get to take that with me to the next place. So that was my start in early childhood education.
And I have to say, I think we've maybe said this at one time in our lives, like we all know as educators what grades we can stick with.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that third was the minimum, like an 8-year-old to sixth grade. And I did work study when I was in my getting my associates. I did work study at a preschool or a childcare center. It's like 2 to 4, 2 to 5, and I loved it. But I knew, right, that it was best that I stay with the upper grades. It was just kind of my style.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
funny to me because third grade is my cutoff. Like, you guys know too much. You think you know too much. They start to get really sassy. I remember at that before and after school program having a third grader tell me that my nails were ratchet because I, had my chip nail polish. Yeah. I need to be with some kids who have less language
Right,
or
the
who are a
honesty.
little more honest, but younger kids are honest, but they don't notice the same kind of things that older kids notice. Like they're not gonna look at my nails or anything like that. So I really appreciated the littles. And with preschoolers, my sweet spot's like 3 to 5 year olds. 4-year-olds, I love them. They're so much fun. It's amazing to watch them discover new things, and they're so funny. The things that they say and the conversations that you can have with them, and they're so independent. I really adore them. 3-year-olds, it starts to get a little iffy because you get the 3-year-olds that are like 4-year-olds, and then you get 3-year-olds that are still like 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
And so that's a little scary. And then infants and toddlers, I will come by and say hi. I will hold a baby, but that's as far as I can go. I can't stay in a classroom for more than 15 to 20 minutes before I'm crying and freaking out. Yeah, everybody I think has their age group.
Yeah, I definitely have big props for all the ECE teachers. Y'all do the real work, like because they come in like literally with nothing for school. You know what I mean? No training. Like I'm lucky.
Yep.
Sixth grade, they pretty much understand how school works. You know what I mean? And the basics of what you need to get through the day. ECE, y'all still clean up accidents and stuff like that and help people make it through the day. So shout out to y'all. Shout out.
Yeah, for
Absolutely.
real.
And I think that's one thing that some people, if they're not familiar with early childhood, they might not recognize that I think there's still this perception that early childhood is daycare and, the kids are just playing all day.
Oh
But
no.
really, we are building that foundation for that child to be successful in school.
Real work.
That child in preschool, even in their toddler rooms, they are learning how to sit down at circle. They're learning how to listen and follow directions
Yes.
and regulate their feelings. If a child cannot regulate their feelings, how do you expect them to go on and learn in kindergarten if they can't sit down, if they can't cooperate with their friends? So,
That's
I
right.
mean, it's such an essential piece to just like a person's success, honestly, in school.
For sure. Yep. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. So important. So Colorado Springs, is that where most of your career has was teaching has been, Colorado Springs?
Actually, the bulk of my career has been up in Fort Collins.
Oh,
So
okay.
I
Okay.
stayed, I was with Head Start for maybe about was it 1 year or 2 years or a year and a half? It was a really weird time. I was like about to get into a divorce. So just there were so many things happening. And
Yeah.
A
I
little
ended up moving up to
complex.
Fort Collins. Yeah,
Like life
yeah, lots
is.
of
Yep.
life things and
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, working out childhood traumas and just all those things that, honestly teaching I think really helped me with. I felt like I was teaching kids social emotional curriculum and I was learning things myself, like, oh, nobody taught me how to do that. Um,
Yeah.
Yep.
we would
Yep.
have these exercises where, you teach the kids, okay, when you're feeling really angry, you put your hands on your tummy and you take a deep breath and you say, I feel angry. And I would recognize that nobody in my childhood taught me how to express my feelings like that. But
Mm.
I digress. I
Yep.
moved up to Fort Collins, and I worked in a for-profit center for a year. I was obviously one of the first employees to work there. It had just opened, and it was a corporate center with the headquarters in Florida, and it was not for me. It was not a good fit. There were just lots of things that I found not developmentally appropriate. Just it, what corporate wanted, I felt like went against what I knew as a teacher I was supposed to do. Um, in Colorado, we have a quality rating system called Colorado Shines, and it was a program that could not participate because their program philosophy is just so different. I'm sure you guys know quality means different things to different people, and I think that was a program for parents whom, quality to them may be academics. And I think in early childhood, we have shifted to really focusing on social emotional development, and we're not doing workbooks and things like that in the classroom. That's not really where you want your kids to be at that age. So I ended up finding a community-based program, and that was my home for 5 years. And I guess that's probably where the bulk of my experience in one place ended up being. And it was a great program.
Yeah. So like, we are all Black educators. So tell us about like your experience as a Black educator and how that impacted your work.
I remember hearing, I don't know if it was, I think it was a statistic. I really can't remember where I heard it, but I remember reading about how some people don't have Black teachers until college. Like there's a majority of people who go through their entire like school career without having a single Black educator. And for me, it became important to be that person for somebody, and them not have to wait to college to see somebody who looks like them in the classroom. Working up in Fort Collins, which is a very predominantly white area, it was definitely an experience.
Yeah.
I can say with full confidence that I was probably the only Black people or Black person that a lot of those kids interacted with, especially on a daily or frequent basis. But I think that opened up a really great opportunity for conversations with those children that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I've had kids ask me when I'm washing my hands, why doesn't your paint come off? So that's an opportunity to talk to them about, well, actually, this is my skin color. That's your skin color. Questions about when during the summers, my preschool classroom would turn into a school age summer program. And one of the kids told me that she had learned that year about slavery and about Jim Crow and all these things. And she asked me, she's like, would you have been able to be my teacher if we were in the 50s? And I thought about it and I was like, honestly, probably not. So they had a safe person to ask those questions to and to make those comments. Because I feel like their parents sometimes don't know how to handle that because, it's such a sensitive topic. I feel like there's a lot of white parents who don't feel comfortable talking about race with their kids. They might not know what to say, it's nothing against them. One of the kids that I had interacted with made a comment where he just looked at me, he goes, "You're Black. Your arm is Black. Is the rest of you Black?" And I was like, yeah, my arms are brown, my face is brown. I was like, my whole body's brown. What about you, dude? Like, what color are you? And we had that conversation. And I jokingly told his mom about it because I thought it was cute. I thought it was, it was a funny moment for me. And she was horrified. And then she shared that, he does that in church where, Mom, there's a Black lady over there. And she doesn't know how to handle that. So I felt good that in my position, I could be that person where they could have that conversation and they can say those comments to, and instead of being hushed, instead of being told, we don't talk about that, or, just not being addressed, we can have an easy conversation where there's nothing shameful about talking about somebody's skin color or noticing that somebody has a different skin color. It's just a fact of life, and we talked about it and then we moved on. And as far as being a Black early childhood provider in a predominantly white program in town, I felt like that was I don't want to say it was a responsibility, but it was definitely a good opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So like you share this, your calling to ECE, and you find, it sounds like you had a great training ground, in your Head Start program that equipped you with a lot of the skills that I think a lot of educators wish they would get in all training programs and support. You moved to a community up in Fort Collins, had one experience, but found a community that, you seem to be thriving in and having positive experiences. So let's get to, I think one of the critical questions, because the exit interview, like your story, like I feel like it's a very bright day and the sun, we're going down the road and it's shining and things are looking really good and positive.
ECE style.
ECE style. We're singing, circle time, all that, snacks are handed out, everybody's shared, all the good stuff is happening. So what brought you to this point where you're on the exit interview and you've since left the classroom and left all of that wonderfulness?
Right. Where does it all come crashing down? I feel like it might have been a little bit of a slow burn. I think that there was a little bit of a culture shock for me leaving my Head Start, my federally funded Head Start program, and going into a community-based program where we did not have the same kind of resources. I didn't have speech pathologists coming into my classroom every day. I didn't have OTs coming in, behavioral therapists. I lost all of those resources that I thought was standard. And for anybody who doesn't know, it's not. If you are not in a school district, then you're probably not getting those services unless you have, throughout Colorado, we have early childhood councils. They are organizations that are actually in state statute, and they coordinate birth to 5 services across the state. We have 35 councils that cover all 64 counties. And a lot of those councils do have programs where, for example, they have early childhood mental health consultants that can go out to community programs, but there's not many consultants. So, they have very large caseloads. And that's just one provider. There's still those kids that are going to need speech, that are going to need OT. So being in my classroom, especially, I was in a community-based nonprofit program that really aimed to serve children from low-income families. You tend to run into a lot of children who have had delays that maybe haven't been caught by previous teachers or by parents, maybe because their child wasn't in childcare, or sometimes you have younger parents who just don't know. There are so many things. So I was dealing with it. I don't want to say dealing with that, but that was a challenge that I saw throughout my time there. And toward my last few years at that program, I was then in a Colorado preschool program classroom, or CPP, which is a state-funded preschool program. And we did this through a partnership with the school district. So we were not in the district, but the district was funding that classroom. And so you have children who have a lot of risk factors, and with risk factors, you tend to get children that have a lot of delays and disabilities. And once again, I was seeing all these children falling through the cracks and not being able to get services for them. Even though our classroom was a district partnership, because we were not in the district, they would not send us support when we needed it. So we had these kids who, were flagging as, this child needs an IEP before they go to kindergarten. Like, these kids need support, and I just wasn't able to get it. And that, I think, was probably the catalyst. Well, that was part of the burnout. I think there's just like a stack of things that were going on. I think what really was probably the last straw, or at least like what started me actually thinking about leaving the classroom, was the summer of 2020. Well, spring, summer of 2020. So our program had closed for about 7 weeks, and we ended up going back in May. So we were one of the only programs that were open, and we're operating under a lot of fear. Nobody knows, if we're going to get sick. We didn't even have a vaccine yet. We're all overworked and underpaid, and the parents were very on edge, and I felt that I felt honestly a lot of parents were being very unfair with us. They were very upset about policies that really had nothing to do with us. They were health department things. And then as the pandemic went on, which I don't know if it's not finished.
Right. No, it's not.
We started to notice that the kids were really starting to show effects of the inconsistency in care, of not being able to see people's lips when they're wearing masks. And that is not me complaining about wearing masks. I am 100% for it. That is not a complaint. It is just a observation.
Sure.
But sometimes it was like feral kids, honestly. You'd have kids come in and they had never been in childcare before, or they had been in 5 different childcares because centers kept closing down and parents needed to put them spot really quick. And so things were just so inconsistent. We had a classroom that was just burning through teachers. Every couple of weeks they had a new teacher. The kids, how do you cope with that when you have a different caregiver every couple of weeks? And so we were seeing a lot of behaviors. We were seeing a lot of delays, especially speech delays. And in my 4-year-old classroom, I had probably 30% of my kids were still in diapers. And that was very new for me.
Wow.
Like usually you have to kids get potty, they potty train when they're ready, but these kids were nowhere near being ready. And those things were piling on, but once again, we didn't have support for those kids. So I will put that in one bucket of, okay, this is one thing.
Yeah.
That started it. But as you guys know, summer 2020, things were not good. George Floyd was murdered. That was in 2020, correct?
Yep.
And things with Black Lives Matter started to move forward, and it was getting a lot of attention. A lot of people were sitting at home and had more access to this information. And admittedly, I was probably spending a little too much time taking in a lot of the news that was going on, and it was really starting to affect me. And what I noticed was that I felt like some of my white coworkers were avoiding me, especially if they knew I was talking about it. I had one instance where a teacher who I thought I'd been really good friends with had asked me how I was doing. And I'm not good at small talk. I'm just not. And I told her, what, I'm not doing well. And I started telling her, I'm feeling a little scared. I'm feeling a little frustrated that this is going on, that people like me are being murdered because they look like me. I'm scared for my future. I'm scared for maybe I offloaded a little too much, but after that girl didn't talk to me for the rest of the time that she worked there. I got uninvited to Chili's.
Not Chili's.
They cut you off from Chili's?
Not from the fajitas. Not from the fajitas.
And you guys, it was like right when restaurants started opening up again. I was so excited. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go places. This is cool. And then she came back with, so we can only have this many people at our table, and there's too many, so you can't come.
Oh wow.
Like, you invited me first. But this is probably correlation, not causation. But I started
long side eye.
Yeah. Yep. And I really started to look at myself and look at my place in my community. And I started to just kind of feel a little weird about it. And I think what really got me was a colleague who was handling social media for that program. And she came to me and she asked me, she was like, I'm going to ask you, because I'm Black, which is implied. I see everybody's posting, things about Black Lives Matter and that they, messages to support. Should we do something like that? And I was like, if you mean it, I think you should do it. You do have 2 Black kids that go to school. You have
2 whole Black kids.
Yeah. You have some kids that go to the school, they'll see that and it does mean something to them. But if you mean it, it has to be sincere. So we had that conversation, and then a couple days later, I asked her about it, and she said, "Oh, I decided not to do it. I just don't want to rock the boat." And I felt some kind of way about that because I had felt tokenized in the first place for being, I'm going to go ask the Black teacher what I should do about Black Lives Matter, which you could have asked a couple people. I don't know, and I could be reading too much into it. I'm not sure, but
You're not.
Don't gaslight yourself. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Okay. I don't want to minimize, but I also don't want to. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was already feeling tokenized about that, and then for me to give you my opinion and tell you that, I am looking at everybody's social media right now, and I see who's saying things, who's not saying things, who's letting their racist auntie keep carrying on conversations on their Facebook. People do notice that. And then for her to say that she didn't want to do that because she didn't want to upset anybody, that made me feel very frustrated, and it didn't make me feel valued at all. And what really, and I feel like this is a very long story.
So we're here for it. We're here for it.
With another just I don't know, pin in the balloon. I can't even think of an analogy right now because I'm like getting upset just thinking about it. But so all this is going on in my brain. And then I have this one child and this in my class. And this ends up being just like the intersection of all of these things that I've just been complaining about. I had this boy who was Black. He was globally disabled. And we had been fighting for support for him. And finally,
can you pause 1 second? What did you say? Back up. What kind of disabled?
Globally delayed. So
can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So he just everything, physically, cognitively, speech-wise. He had a lot going on. He had a very rough life. And he was finally in a space where he had consistent caregivers. He was a very sweet kid, and with some support from his teachers, he was able to start catching up. This kid who was 4 years old, almost 5, came into my class with 0 language. All he could do was cry and scream. And by the time by the time he left, which I'll get to, he was telling people, he told our aide, stop, I don't like it when you do that. So he was progressing.
Oh, wow.
He was making progress. And I truly think it was because he was with people who cared. I mentioned earlier that my classroom turns into a school age program in the summer, and he ended up being put in a classroom with somebody who had heard about his behavior before she got him. And I felt like she had formed an opinion about him before he got in there, and he did not last 2 weeks before he was expelled from the program. And I felt it was such a disservice to him because he had been making progress. I'm trying to think of, I just spaced in my brain. But I just felt like he had so many disadvantages, and I can understand saying, we're not equipped to handle this child. But I think we were kind of at a point where we were, and we had been making progress with him. And he was a couple months away from being in a Head Start classroom. Like he had gotten into a district classroom where he would be getting those full services. So he needed that childcare during the summer, and he lost it, and he lost his slot. And that was really upsetting for me. And it was something that I was really upset about, honestly, didn't really forgive my program for. As much as I love them, I'm still salty about that. But what really got me is after he was expelled, they used his photo in a letter, what is it called? An appeal letter for donors. And he was
Hold on.
one of maybe 2 or 3 Black children in the whole school. And I don't want to say that that was intentional. You know, if
it was.
It felt very shady, and it felt very underhanded. And it's like, you guys are going to try to make money off of this boy when you didn't give him a chance. You didn't set him up for success. I'm going to be honest, I was disgusted by it.
Can I just okay. Yeah. So expelling a child, a 4-year-old, you said, from school, tokenizing this child, using his photo, all the pieces, the silence, that's a lot. You said it's the slow burn. You had a long candle. You had a very long candle. Yeah.
And
wow.
I think it's hard because I really love that place, and I feel like, you know, anybody who listens to this who knows me is probably going to put 2 and 2 together and figure out where it is. But you know, it is what it is. But yeah, I think what really kept me in it for so long is, you know, you never want to leave the kids. I think that people stay in the classroom for longer than they meant to because they don't want to leave their students. And it's not that we don't think that other people are capable. It's just like, you know, that you put so much work and heart into it, and you just worry about them. And I think in early childhood in particular, I don't know how it is in elementary ed, but early childhood is a broken industry. You know, it's very hard. Compensation is low. It can be hard to staff. And so sometimes you might get stuck in situations where if it were any other kind of job, you probably wouldn't stay.
Yep.
But, you know, you're in a center where you're like, oh, well, you know, the last place I was at wasn't like this. You know, the last place I was at was worse. And I think I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it, but I think that people kind of become complacent because they know that other people have it worse. But you don't have to be okay with your situation just because it's better than somebody else's situation. Your situation can still be not okay for you.
Yep.
And I think that it took me a while to recognize that and get to a point where I was like, okay, you know, I have to go. I realized I was becoming that grouchy teacher that wasn't hanging out with kids. I wasn't sitting down on the floor playing with them as much. I wasn't putting my all into my lesson plans, into my activities. And I just knew that if I stayed, I would be doing the children in my class a disservice. And so I heard from a friend about a job, and I ended up applying. I actually applied for 3 jobs and an interview that week, and I got the one that I really wanted. So that was it. That was the end of my time in the classroom.
When we get back, we'll talk about some ideas you may have around making sure that Black educators stay in the classroom. We'll talk about this job that you received and what brings you joy. So when we get back, we'll talk more about it. All right, we're back. So before our break, we had a chance to talk about all the ways that Enola was dealing with some of like the childcare issues during COVID, what was happening in your classroom, what was happening in the space with educators, right? Being uninvited to fajitas at Chili's, right? The ultimate, Kevin and I, you know, that's a no.
The worst part.
The worst part, right? And we're making fun of it, but
that's
push
serious,
out, that
though.
exclusion,
that tells you something. That tells you
it
something.
does. Yeah, that silence, we see it so much that folks on our podcast talk about the people in their jobs just kind of stop speaking to them, walk past them, don't acknowledge them, don't invite them out anymore. just all the things, right? And so what you're saying, you know, we've heard this so many times. So our question is, tell us if you believe you have some ideas. What do you think would be some ways that programs like the one you spoke about and the ones that you worked in can keep Black educators, right? COVID is kind of slowing down a bit, but people are still obviously passing away from COVID and getting sick from COVID. But like, what do you think that these school districts, programs, for-profits, nonprofits can do to keep Black folks in those spaces?
That is such a big question because there's such a workforce crisis in early childhood. But I do think that this issue does go a little bit deeper beyond compensation, which is, you know, that's usually the talking point for the workforce crisis in early childhood. I think one thing, you know, I don't think that early childhood professionals are always seen as professionals, and I think that that's a big part too. Being sure that, you know, programs and other educators who aren't in the ECE space look at those providers like the professionals that they are. They know what they're doing. They have the expertise. Many of them are very educated. I think that there's an idea that you can just walk into a classroom and be a teacher and be in there by yourself, and that's really not the case. There are at minimum college classes and work experience and just time that goes into being qualified to be a lead teacher in a classroom. So that's one piece, but I think that that's very broad. Diving deeper into the compensation piece, you know, early childhood teachers in America are barely above federal poverty wages. And as you can imagine, that there is a wage gap that exists between white educators and Black educators. So you already have people who, you know, at best, like when you're making the most, you're probably just still barely above that federal poverty line. I was reading a study from the Center for American Progress, and they were saying that when accounting for inflation, early childhood teachers actually made less in 2019 than they did in 2012.
Like 2012.
Yes, less. They were making less in 2019 than they were in 2012. And the wage gap between white teachers, and I believe it's white women, and I would assume for the purpose of the study that it is cisgender women, but the wage gap between white women and Black women in early childhood increased from 2012 to 2019. So you would think that with all the equity and just everything that we've been talking about, that would have gotten better, but I learned that got worse. And so you have, I actually took some notes because I was a little appalled by this. So hourly wages for white women in early childhood rose 92 cents from 2012 to 2019, but wages for Black women dropped by 40 cents. And then the wages for Hispanic women dropped by over $1.
Oh, wow.
So it's the gap didn't just sustain itself, it widened that much. And in early childhood education, educators who work with infants and toddlers usually make less money than providers who work with preschool teachers. I think there's like a national average of like $10 less an hour than providers who work with preschool age children. However, a majority of the Black women who work in early childhood work with infants and toddlers. So there's just so many areas for disparities there, because it's not just like infant teachers and preschool teachers, but then it becomes Black and white. And every time you find those differences, that wage gap grows even larger. So with that said, something that, you know, programs and school districts need to do is assess the salary scale in their programs, look at the salaries and determine, you know, is there something unintentional going on? I'm not saying that it's intentional, but, you know, if you're looking at your wages, are you seeing that your Black educators are being paid less than your white educators? If so, there needs to be a reconstruction of how you pay people. And I think with that too is, something I mentioned about Head Start, and one of my loves for them was that their willingness to invest in their teachers. And I think that needs to happen more frequently. And there are ways to do that without breaking the bank or compromising, the funding of your program. There are programs that exist. There's one called the Teach Scholarship, which the program pays 90% of your tuition. The scholarship pays 90% of your tuition. Your center pays 5%, and you as the provider pays 5%. So there are so many different ways in Colorado that you can figure out how to do that. And it could just be that many people aren't aware of it, but I've been told to my face, well, we don't want to set a precedent.
Of course.
Oh, wow.
That program. Yeah. And there just needs to be a little bit more willingness, because they're asking people to invest in their business, but they're not willing to invest in the people keeping their business afloat. And that just doesn't work. That's not fair. In early childhood, you are expected to be so flexible. If somebody calls out sick, you need to be there. I don't think I've ever had a consistent schedule until I was working at my last program, who really worked very hard to do that. But it's still every couple months would change. So your schedule's not consistent. You're expected to, sometimes I had a summer where I worked 4 10s because we didn't have anybody. There's so much flexibility expected on the side of the provider. And I do think that administrators need to be just a little bit more cognizant about what they're asking others to do, and ask themselves, are we putting in what we're asking you to put in? And that, I think, is honestly across the board. And I think too, going back, not just with salary, but just in general, looking at your policies and asking, is this equitable? Was I thinking about the people that this would impact when when these were created, when my board created these, who was at the table? And just having more of those conversations about how are we including voices of our Black teachers, of other Black educators in the field. There are many of us out there who are willing to give our input whenever we're asked. Mm-hmm. And are you using that to make sure that the policies in your program and the way that you run your business is fair to everybody who works there, and to the families as well? Excuse me. We talked a little bit earlier about one of my friends who was disenrolled from the program, and something I found was that Black boys make up 18 or 19% of enrollment in preschool programs across the country, but they are over 40% of the children who are expelled or suspended from preschool programs. And so looking
Can you say that again? Say it one more time for us, my audience.
Yes, Black boys make up 18 or 19% of enrollment in preschool programs, but they account for over 40% of the suspensions and expulsions in preschool programs. And so I think thinking about that, and then going back and looking back at policies and asking, how is this happening? Is there anything in here that is contributing to it? And looking at the training that teachers are getting and asking too, is what could we be doing to help prevent this from happening? And I do think a lot of the times it's just that teachers don't have the tools in their toolbox. Training isn't consistent across the board, with the exception of required things like mandated reporter trainings and head trauma trainings. And I do believe that the state of Colorado actually does require early childhood educators to do an anti-bias training now as well. That happened after I left, so I actually haven't taken it myself, but I'm very excited to see that. But making sure too that, is the conversation going beyond that 1 hour training that your teacher is doing online? And I'm going to be honest, I've taken some trainings on that system, and it is very easy to just click, 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 because you want to be done. You have do. This is my planning time. I have lesson plans to write. I guess it all comes down to, what are you as a program, as a business owner, as an administrator, what are you doing to ensure that the Black teachers and the Black children in your program are being treated fairly and equitably?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I guess the next question is, because you mentioned that before our commercial break that you applied for some work and you found something. So what are you doing now? Are you still working in ECE? What are you up to?
So I still work in early childhood. I honestly really love this field. I have a huge passion for it, and I knew that I would never have left my last center to go to another center, but I was ready to move on into a different position. So I work for a program called the Early Childhood Council Leadership Alliance. And the program I work for, we are actually the membership organization for all of the early childhood councils in the state. And so with my job, I get to work with providers, well, not really providers, I don't work directly with them, but I get to work with those councils across the state and support them as they strengthen those early childhood services in their communities. And it really helped me feel like I'm having a little bit of a wider impact. I did feel like I had an impact in my classroom, and I loved what I did. But instead of, impacting one child, or not one child, but one class a year, I have this opportunity to impact all these children across Colorado at one time, even if it's just, a small cog in the machine. I get to be part of that, and that is really exciting for me. And another thing that ECLA does is they do scholarship programs for providers, and the Teach Early Childhood Colorado Scholarship is one that I mentioned earlier. That they pay 90%, the center pays 5%, and the teacher pays 5%. But we also have other scholarships for providers, early childhood professionals who are interested in becoming early childhood coaches, who want to get certified in the different environmental rating scales that we have in early childhood. Just so many options for not just in the classroom, but moving your career toward coaching and mentoring, or being an administrator. Just one of the many jobs that we have in early childhood. Something that I've been doing with one of my colleagues is we have a cohort of high school students who are taking concurrent enrollment classes for ECE, and just kind of giving them some career navigation. And one of them, we're not paying for all of it, but we've been able to give her a scholarship to help her pay for a certificate to be a lactation consultant.
That's awesome.
It's been really cool, and it's been eye-opening for me too, because I knew that early childhood was a very diverse field when it came to roles. I think people typically just think of, teachers and administrators, but,
yep.
Doulas and lactation consultants and coaches and early childhood mental health consultants, and, all these people that work with early childhood, who work with children, who work with families, who work with providers. They are all a part of that community, and that helped open my eyes to that. So that is one part of what I do. And like a lot of people on the nonprofit side of early childhood, I wear several hats. And another hat that I wear is I am the part-time executive director for the Colorado Association for the Education of Young Children, or COASY. And we are the Colorado affiliate of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And that I've actually been doing since I was in the classroom, since it's part-time, it's been very flexible. So that was something that I got to do while I was still in the classroom, but I think that helped open my eyes to the career possibility of being in a nonprofit that supports early childhood. And then with ECLA, having the opportunity to be like in the system building side. So I love it. I really do. I have wonderful coworkers, and I feel really good about the work that I'm doing, and I work from home, so that's exciting. Um, I was so used to, going to work and my classroom smells like poop, and
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
I don't have to
The
clean
the
any
faint
diapers.
whiff of urine.
Yeah, exactly. Like it just doesn't go away, especially when your classroom is near like infant toddler class.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's cool. Like I said, my house doesn't smell like poop. I can go to the bathroom whenever I want. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have parents yell at me.
And that's the thing. That's for a different episode.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh yeah.
Oh
Especially
yeah.
during COVID. I feel like it got a little excessive. But yeah, it's been great. And I have not regretted my choice. I miss the kids, and I do miss the relationships with them and the families, and my co-teacher that I worked with for 5 years. She was amazing. I love her. She is my work wife. But I feel really good about my decision.
Well, we love to hear that. Asia loves to hear that. We what we call that is encouragement for people. But I think one of our most important questions before we wrap up with you, Enola, what's bringing you joy right now?
That's such a good question. Gosh, I in the last year moved in with my partner, and just like spending time with him and our dogs and my snake and his cat. I did not like cats until I moved in with this one. I did not like them. But the cat is truly the coolest animal in the house. So honestly, it's just I think having so many positive just having positive people around that I can spend time with, that I feel good about, having, being in a work situation where mentally I feel balanced and happy and healthy. I think that's just, it's been amazing.
That's awesome. Well, another episode wrapped up. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. You would be our, I believe, second person who has worked in the field of ECE. Jackie, who you know well, was on the podcast, and her episode dropped in January of 2023. But we're just so grateful to have you. All right, folks, this is Dr. Asia Lyons and my co-host, Kevin. Say peace out, Kevin.
Peace out.
And Enola, we're so grateful to have you, and you all have a great night. Bye.